for your presentation and bringing your expertise. I fully agree. We need to hear more on these types of topics, where to go next, the clean energy strategy like you're talking about. I know we can only dig in so much right now, but I guess I'd like to ask you, can you elaborate more on what it could look like in terms of pathways to decarbonization, what kind of strategies we could implement? And I'm going to add in another question connected to that. Like, why do you think NB Power in New Brunswick is trailing in terms of developing renewable energy? You mentioned, for example, PEI is going full steam ahead, and why the focus is so much on like developing SMRs.
So first of all, government matters. And so having a policy for a renewable portfolio standard is why we have what we have. But the committee needs to know what that 40% renewable portfolio standard actually represents. 35% of it is just Mactaquac and Grand Falls. We've got 5% that's wind. And I know that because I look at the data all the time and I see exactly where the megawatt hours are coming from. And so we need to update, not just update that energy policy, but we need to double the renewable portfolio standard and put a fire under NB Power, because the Energy and Utilities Board will not approve expenditures unless it's government policy. And so we need to do that. I also see a system that does respond to the public a bit more. We should have more solar. We should have more community energy, more energy democracy in that way, more distributed power. We need big industrial projects, but to the point made earlier about footprint, we can avoid a lot of footprint by maximizing. It's not going to solve everything, but we should maximize what we can do with solar and try to minimize our projects. We need to look at this question of exports versus supplying the needs we have. Imagine, we got to replace our entire system, and we're going to build 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts, 300 megawatts of wind to make hydrogen for export. Like, how do you make those choices if you don't have a strategy and know what we need internally to the province? So I do think that the system should be one that New Brunswickers choose. Quebec, for example, has had many hearings, many energy hearings, where the public gets to have a say in what kind of energy system they want. I think New Brunswickers deserve the right to have a say in what kind of energy system they want. I think NB Power, to give them credit, and I tend to be pretty sympathetic to NB Power because I pay attention, and David's putting his head down. But, the EUB really, does restrict a lot of what they could do. I see a lot of potential and willingness there, but they also have to be pushed. Institutions are traditional and they're risk averse. So we need better policies, we need stronger targets, and we need a renewable portfolio standard that isn't just relying on legacy hydro. The other question I'd put to the committee is, what are we going to do when Mactaquac's down for the life extension? If you've got 30% or 35% of your renewable energy portfolio standard coming from that, what are we going to do? And I was very disturbed to hear yesterday, and if you don't know it, it is a regulated requirement, and NB Power is choosing not to meet that standard and is negotiating with the minister about flexibility. I hope that that is a discussion we can all have about what the options should be on the table.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for raising that. I was concerned to hear that come out of the hearings yesterday as well. And I guess I noticed in your presentation, the timelines you are talking about, it's setting like in the next couple of years, in the next 5 years, because we're on a tight timeline when it comes to the climate crisis, and maybe you can speak more to what those timelines mean, but I mean, we need to talk about some other things in another hearing, but we're talking about nuclear today. Where do you see SMRs fitting in with what you're proposing is required in terms of timelines, in terms of energy?
So I'm the social scientist, so I'll speak to the social science part of this, right? Which is, I have absolutely no belief that SMRs will be ready in time for 2030, nor 2035. I just think that's absolutely impossible. I think we've fallen in the deep pit of hype. However, I also think we shouldn't take comfort from, I've heard, and I'm sorry to say this, maybe I shouldn't say in the committee, but I've heard more than once now, well, we'll just wait for a change of government in Ottawa and that'll take care of it and they'll just stop all this silliness. We can't do that because states are moving. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US is changing everything. Carbon border adjustments is changing everything. Nobody's going to want our dirty power. And so we need to move with where the world is going, and that is very rapid. The Ukraine war has not decelerated the transition to renewables. Yes, you might have a concern about, and we've been following this work very carefully. Sure, there was concern about this winter. They did build their gas supplies in Europe, and they are making it through this winter. They are concerned about next winter, but that does not mean the renewables are stopping or the shift in transition in energy. They have imposed a carbon border adjustment. And so we need to go with the times and be ready for that and not assume that somehow New Brunswick's going to be given leniency or that we can extend deadlines. We need to run with the story here, and that includes building a better plan for Beldoon than some of the, and I could take a whole hearing just on Beldoon, but some of the options I'm hearing, I think, would not necessarily position us for the long term.
Okay. Thank you. I see the clock ticking down. I'm going to let my colleague here, Mr. Coon, ask some questions, and so I don't think it'll come back to me. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, and good afternoon. Faisal Kazi, the CEO for Siemens Canada, has introduced the Premier now, I think, in 6 different states of the province address. I met with him when he was here, had the opportunity to meet with him, and he's really interesting. He's got a vision of a pathway to decarbonization that is based on renewables and storage and smart grid. I haven't heard you talk about smart grid, which allows for what they call, demand flexibility, so jargon, in other words, modifying the demand. He had an interesting sort of concept, and I want to hear what you think about this. So he said, if the system, like we're sort of stuck in this mindset of big power plants plugged into a grid. But he said to me, think about solar panels becoming commonplace on homes and small businesses and commercial buildings, along with batteries at that level, not the big utility batteries, but the batteries that would be in a house or in a restaurant or in a metal shop. And then NB Power would crowdsource electricity from both the renewables and the storage, depending on the time of day and so on. And he went on to say that actually Siemens worked with Ford in developing the Ford F-150 truck, the electric one, to ensure that it had the kind of battery storage capacity and hookups so that, as you said, it could supply power to a house that's lost its power, or be available to a utility to source electricity from the truck's battery. But you need a smart grid to do all of that. So maybe you could speak a little bit about your view of smart grid in terms of the pathways to decarbonization, because I didn't really see it in your presentation.
Thanks, David. And Mo can jump in if I miss anything on this one. But the whole issue of digitization and the smart grid is just, I didn't mention it because it's so fundamental to the system. You can't really do it without it. And we will need that kind of nanosecond level management. But it is fundamental to the distributed system that I was talking about, which is truly energy democracy. But it's also why we have to engage the population. They are not going to just be takers anymore. They're going to play in this. They're going to participate. They're going to be energy suppliers as well as energy users. And so we do need to engage them. So from our perspective, I've been waiting and I get the supply chain issues, but I want my smart meter. I want that two-way option on the electric vehicle. So I'll just leave it at that. I can see Mo's capable on this one.
I can add to that, and I think the smart grid is a way of just modernizing our current infrastructure, which is many years behind, in my opinion. And especially if we move on to increase the amount of electricity generation we have, possibly more microgrids, especially in rural areas, or individual homes generating energy. What these smart grids allow us to do is just it's just a big data machine that will allow to record what's happening and every second all around, and it can communicate with the battery storage and the renewables a lot more effectively than a person can, and it can ensure that proper electricity is being transmitted where it needs to be. So I think it's just a way of modernizing our current grids, and I think that's extremely important as we grow our electricity system. We want a smarter system that can keep up with this growth, and especially if we have more pieces of this pie distributed all over New Brunswick generating energy, rather than just, especially we have community-owned projects, we want to be able to regulate and know how much energy they're producing, how much they need in case they have a severe weather event, and the smart grid will allow for faster communication and to get that energy where it needs to be. So.
Have you seen jurisdictions with policies that foster the adoption of battery storage at the household or level of the small enterprise or medium-sized enterprise?
Currently, I haven't seen any policies about that, but
Doesn't mean it's not there. We'll check, David.
I'll have to check and get back to you on that.
I think it would be important to look at, I mean, I know there's lots of policy examples out there to foster the development of more distributed energy generation system with rooftop solar and community wind and so on. But when it comes to incorporating storage into that at the household or business level, that would be interesting to know what's been done elsewhere there. I saw today that the UK growth in energy storage has just been extraordinary in the past year, and we're seeing that happen around the world. But right here in New Brunswick, as you pointed out, at St. John Energy is opening up their 42 megawatt wind farm in March with significant storage associated with it. So it's encouraging that in New Brunswick here we're seeing some of this this kind of shift to new approaches that, and I know St. John Energy is also working on smart grid, as is MB Power. I just haven't seen the development of smart grid as I expected, so maybe you could comment on the slowness in getting the smart grid up and running.
Well, I think that will require a big initial investment, but the long-term savings and for New Brunswickers will be felt almost immediately. Because if you have a smart grid coupled with your renewables or storage, the people will have access to their electricity a lot faster and a lot more reliably than they currently do. Because currently it's they're buying it, and if it's offline, they have no access to any energy, which is increasing prices. So I think.
And I'd suggest you ask MB Power. We're not really privy to the details of how their project has been delayed and why, but it's a question worth asking.
Thank you.